Our guest tonight is a parapsychologist, and he is the world's leading authority on the scientific investigation into channeling. And he has co-authored a book called Suicide: What Really Happens in the Afterlife, Channeled Messages from the Dead. I find this subject really interesting, following a show that we just did on with PMH Atwater on the near-death experience. He's been professor of psychology for 32 years and is currently teacher at Argosy University, and just completed an interview with Art Bell Coast to Coast. I'm honored to present Dr. Jon Klimo.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Dr. Klimo, you told me that you started out as an artist before you got interested in channeling. Mm-hmm. How is that?
How is it?
Yeah.
Well, as a poet and a painter, both verbal and visual, way back into probably 7, 8, 9 years old, the creative process sort of comes upon you. Inspiration visits you. The winds pick up and play over, as Shelley said, the Aeolian lyre plays the strings of it, and you're sort of like you're an instrument that's being played. Mm-hmm. It's sort of a self-transcending influx or inspiration breathes into you and through you. That's kind of a fancy way to put it all, but you begin to feel possessed by an excitation, a feeling of something larger than yourself, a visionary sense, images, feelings, that the ineffable that somehow wants to be made effable. Mm-hmm. And that was really, even though that began in the early years as a poet and a painter and publishing books of poetry and poetry readings and exhibiting art and so on, it did lead me into studying channeling. Mm-hmm. Because where does it come from? Where does creativity come from? Where does inspiration, intuition come from? It seems to be self-transcending. It seems to go more than just one's own lived experience or memory traces or local personality, but it's sort of mysterious and sort of awesome, and you're grateful that when it happens, it's like a gift. Mm-hmm. And then when I turned my attention to the emerging phenomenon of channeling, I could see the similarities that some people who are creative people may be doing what I'm defining as channeling, and some people who are channeling may be a kind of like an art form where they are accessing sources of knowledge and guidance and inspiration from beyond themselves.
Mm-hmm. And you've also written a book called Channeling, and this is the definitive book on the subject, I think. Mm-hmm. I read in the foreword here by Charles Tart. He asks one question: who am I? And then he gives two possible answers to this question. One possible answer is, in Western culture, is that you are a creation of God, a creation that is flawed in vital ways, conceived and born in original sin. You are someone who must constantly struggle to obey the rules laid down by that God, lest you be damned. It is an answer that is depressing in many ways. On one hand, it leads to low self-worth and the expectation of failure. On the other, to rigid and conceited arrogance of being one of the elect. Further, this view doesn't really encourage you to think about who you really are, as the answer has already been given from a higher source. And if I can paraphrase the other answer to this question, it's an answer that we're, I think, painfully familiar with in Silicon Valley. And paraphrasing it would be, we are an accident of the universe. The brain is a chemical process, perhaps a chemical electrical process, a cause and effect chain of events with no way out, no particular meaning, and the whole thing ends in oblivion. I'd like to ask you a question. You have a third alternative to this. So if I were to ask you, who are you, what would you say?
I am a progeny, an offspring, a son of God, the universal creator, in whom I hope he would be well pleased with me, but I always feel I'm very, very far from that. We are all sons and daughters or offspring of a common creator, infinite creative potential, a universal consciousness field, and we're all chips off the old block, a very small subset of it. We're like subpersonalities. I mentioned that in my channeling book. We're like subpersonalities of a larger transcendent being, and we have dissociated relationship with that larger being so that we don't have a two-way connection to it very well. So maybe channeling is one way to access more of that mind at large, that universal being that we are like this dissociated subpersonality of. But we see the world, and we see the many. We don't see the one. We see it through these dissociated lenses, and it is very very frustrating to, unless you have enlightened moments and transcendent moments, to get past that kind of dissociation. So I would say I am a part of God, very amnesically blocked and stunted down, chunked down, a step down, low down and hunkering in mammalian form and with egoic consciousness, deeply aching to go home and understand my Creator and understand me as a creator in relationship to my Creator.
When you channel,
yes,
you channel entities that are disembodied.
No, I don't channel. No.
You don't channel.
No, I don't do that.
When one channels.
I don't do windows like that.
Okay.
No.
When one channels.
Yeah, when most people who channel, by my definition, if channeling is receiving information coming to or through you from a source beyond yourself and not from another physically embodied being, but from some other being not physically embodied. It could be human, it could be otherwise. See, mediumship is channeling only discarnate human spirits. Human spirits who've left the physical body, dead people. That's mediumship. And somebody who does that's a medium. A channel is a more subsuming term. It includes mediums and the sources of the medium's communication, which is deceased human spirits. But channeling also includes like nature spirits, God with a small g, includes extraterrestrials perhaps. Who knows what it might include. At one point, I interviewed Houston Smith, the great authority on religion. And he said, you know, I agree that with all what you've said in your book, the manuscript, and the channeling is real. You can channel these kind of sources. I disagree with only one source that you mentioned in the chapter on the kinds of beings that can be channeled. He said, you say people can channel God. He says, I don't believe you can channel God, because I subscribe to the definition of St. Aquinas or whoever it was, that God is a circle whose center is everywhere and circumference is nowhere, or the other way around. Right. It's not an anthropomorphized localization on the other end of a hotline. It was too diffuse and too universal and transcended that, and so he didn't believe that anybody can channel God. Although we've had some best-selling people like, what's his name? Conversations with God and others like that, you know, and there are dozens of people that claim that God was their source for their material.
Let's talk about your suicide book. These channels have contacted, whatever you want to call them, from the other side, from the afterlife, is that it? What do they say about suicide?
Well, most of the sources that we studied are the spirits of people who claim to have committed suicide. So we went to the subset of all the literature of channeled and mediumistically communicated from sources who claim to have got to the other side, lost their lives by their own hand, by suicide. And there also are spirit sources who are not physically embodied, who have that larger frame of reference to speak from, that may be more omniscient or knowing frame of reference rather than our little dense embodied egoic level here on Earth, who give their take on suicide as well. So it's just generally people from the other side, but particularly suicides, talking about the repercussions of their own acts, what they meet on the other side. It sounds a lot like anybody who dies who could communicate back from the other side, and even near-death experiences that communicate to that little taste of it.
When someone commits suicide, what happens on the other side?
Well, it's quite similar to anybody who dies, except that it can be more abrupt, more blunt. You can carry guilt over. You can feel more lost. You can maybe be an atheist that didn't think anything. You just wanted out, void, obliteration, and you find that it didn't end. The story goes on the other side, and it's and for people who don't have a larger belief system or a transpersonal or transphysical sense of a larger existence realm, it's very bewildering to get over there. And it's not physical level; it's more higher dimensionality, higher frequency, subtler energy, whatever you want to call it. And it's like it's like a dream, waxing in and out of a lucid dream.
Would you say that consciousness is not dependent on the brain or not dependent on the body?
There's something in consciousness studies called the hard problem. It says that if you believe, as Western neuroscience and Western science in general says, that consciousness is an emergent epiphenomenon of a viable brain activity. It comes from physicality and it returns to physicality. And if you don't have that viable substrate to serve it, there's nothing. So it's reducible to brain activity. Now, how can you reduce consciousness? I'm speaking as a poet now, too. Introspect and taste the qualia, the lived experience, the sensation of your own consciousness, And I mean, so vast, so beyond space and time. Descartes called it unextended substances, whatever you want to make of it. How do you reduce that down to little neuronal firing patterns and synaptical jumps and little bioelectric potentials and interference patterns? I don't believe you can. That's the hard problem. So nobody in science really understands how you get the genie of consciousness out of the little biochemical body. That's called the hard problem. I solved the problem. That'll solve the damn thing. But my response that makes it sit for me is, rather than say that the ultimate reality is physicality and consciousness can be reduced to physicality and emerges from it, I say that the base, and that's been said for thousands of years, that the base fundamental ontologically superior reality that everything sits within and emerges from and moves in and out of is a consciousness field, a universal consciousness field. It's a universal mind, universal being, consciousness, spirit field, what Hegel calls absolute spirit.
If someone were to ask you, where is the afterlife, what would you say?
I would say it's a precinct of a held still part of the universal mind.
A held still part?
It's held still. It's like standing wave systems. It's not just all over the place. If everything exists in a universal consciousness field, then right here, the furniture of the room and everything is standing wave systems within that they're thought forms, so to speak. And if you go to the other side, the thought forms are more transient, they're more plastical, protean. Consciousness can affect them. What we call psychokinesis among parapsychologists on this side is very rampant over there. Thinking makes it so. Thoughts are things. You get mixed inside and outside. It's totally subsumed now under a universal inside environment. So is a great inner environmental field on the other side. And so you meet your own demons. And you know, you're worried about something and it comes back at you and you don't know what is the old Cartesian dualism is gone past now.
Question.
Yeah.
Esoteric traditions have said that a veil separates us from the other world. Can you tell me about this veil?
Well, in the perennial philosophy, the perennial wisdom, there's a belief of reincarnation. We're immortal spirits. We're undergoing soul growth. We have to have a lot of opportunities to experience, to go through karma and so on and learn and grow. And so the veil, there's a veiling that normally when you come into an incarnation, you do not remember previous lives. You're not in touch with your higher self. You don't incarnate unless you're a bodhisattva or an enlightened being. You don't bring all that larger awareness, the trans lifetime awareness, into an individual lifetime. You come in veiled so that you can, in this lifetime, learn, tune to this channel, in this soap opera, in this autobiography. Now, the veiling, when you go to the other side, the Tibetan Book of the Dead speaks of not losing the thread, maintaining Gen identity, self-awareness, and continuity of consciousness, and don't lose consciousness. Don't abruptly slip off the tracks into an amnesic discontinuity where when you come to, you're not sure your bearings or whether you're the same you in the mirror. And so part of the Tibetan Book of the Dead teaches to not lose consciousness and not lose the Gen identity as you die. Maintain consciousness through death. Very few people do. And as you start to lose your bearings and your sense of yourself and what to trust, in that betwixt and between, moving through that veil to the other side, it can be like a psychotic episode. You're hallucinating. What you normally would think is your own endophasic psychic material is literally part of the environment. It's the sticks and stones and it's the furniture. So it can be terrifying. You're meeting.
And the goal in this experience is just to let the ego go away and to merge with.
Yeah, to do it gracefully, to do it with certain kind of a trust, and essentially with rehearsal if you can, so that it's not like hitting you between the eyes and panicking you when it actually happens.
So then what reincarnates?
That's open to debate. I'm a member of a group called Survival Net, which is about 60 authorities on people who research survival of physical death, parapsychologists and others. And we have a lot of contention and not a lack of consensus about that. I don't think the same self that you're sitting here now, you, is what reincarnates or even stays on the other side once you physically die. I think there's a higher self in you that you're only a projection part of that is living this lifetime right now, and there's a dissociation between your higher self, which is closer to God or the God within or the oversoul or whatever, or maybe it's even a group soul, but there's a disconnect where you're in this lifetime so you can focus on your homework and your learning and your growth and take the soap opera seriously, so you don't just commit suicide to change the channel.
There's a difference in karmic repercussion between someone who commits suicide out of anger or grief or revenge and someone who is involved in assisted suicide or euthanasia.
Right.
What are the karmic differences there?
Well, I think that generally the spirit realm, as well as people on this side, their general attitude towards suicide is it's unnecessary, it's escapist, and it's irresponsible, and it's avoiding the responsibility you have that something transcending you gave you this life, gave you this opportunity, and by abdicating it without sticking it out, to letting it play its natural out, so you die naturally, so to speak, is avoiding something you were given to work from. It was the presenting problem. So you're escaping from it. And so the karma of that is stronger than if the physical or the psychological pain was so intolerable.
You know, I think you've just, let me put this back on you.
Oh, jeez.
No, it's all right, it's all right.
It was picking it up from my lap. Well, I can speak from my lap.
All right.
The ventriloquist.
Right.
Sorry.
Now, where have we gone through a lapse? Are we in the Bardo, or where are we?
Well, the karmic repercussions are greater if you take your own life when you were basically, you just had a bad love affair, or you wanted to punish somebody and withhold love in the ultimate way by leaving the lifetime. But you had other choices, and it wasn't so intolerable that you couldn't stay. But you made a choice not to stay. That has more negative repercussions karmically than to have the intolerableness of intense physical pain or intense psycho-emotional pain that only you could know how awful it was or unbearable. And so they cut you some slack on the other side for that. That's like, they have some empathy for that.
Yeah. If there is reincarnation and if there is karma, then what is the purpose of coming back to life?
This is a pretty damn quick run through, isn't it? It's like you have one life to live as a blonde, and suddenly, the hair's falling out, the Botox doesn't work, and it's time to go. And it's like, wait a minute, I just was beginning to get the hang of love, forgiveness, it's only on the deathbed, so to speak, that you begin to realize your sins of omission, your sins of commission, and how foolish some of the attachments were, some of the value system was. And you were allowed that opportunity, but so should it only be one life that you had to interact with a larger ground of being and learn and grow? I don't think one is enough. But it may not be the exact same you that comes back, and it may only be when you pool all the little projections down into this level of density, experiential pods of data gathering, and take them back up to the mothership, so to speak, of the higher self or the oversoul or the group soul, that little by little it builds us all going home to God and collecting the Humpty Dumptiness of all those subpersonalities and the associated Godhead back unto itself, even though God itself I don't think is dissociated unto itself.
Right. Are channeled entities concerned with what happens to us here?
They are. If they're kind of more earthbound, they are. They're more self-centered. They want to keep ties to us. They kind of hang around. They dictate books to us. They like to be sources of channel material. But in general, sooner or later, you kind of get off the earthbound inner circles of that and move out to the experiences in the hierarchical levels of the non-physical domain, the afterlife plus, and then you may reincarnate back or not. But in general, they have their own work to do on their own soul growth, and they're becoming spirit guides or helpers unto others there or here. They do care, but essentially we're making our own heaven or hell. We're learning from our own mistakes, and we're creating our own reality individually and conjointly on this level of reality, as we do on all levels of reality. And they're watching us hoist ourselves by our own petard here, and so are extraterrestrials for that matter. I studied extraterrestriology for all my life.
How do you understand an extraterrestrial?
Somebody who's not of the Earth lineage. They may be physically embodied like we are. They may not. They may have transcended the physical in their own lineage, species, planet, whatever.
There's a question I have to ask, and I'd feel bad if I didn't. It might be kind of controversial, but if these channels entities are, somewhat concerned about us, are you aware of any channeled entity that has anything to say about President Bush and how his decisions are affecting people in this world?
Well, you don't have to be a discarnate or an extraterrestrial to take a pretty good shot at that. Let alone when you can get out of your ego and into your higher self and get a little more of a bird's eye view, a little more of a preferred frame of reference, a little more wisdom. It's very hard to cut suckers like that much slack at that point. It's like there may be more to be pitied than censored, but Jesus, you see it on the game board. And, yeah, the Michael material, the channeled material from the entity Michael, that came through a number of Bay Area channels, by the way. So it's like a triangulation that seemed to be coming from the same source to a lot of different people, which is some indirect evidence of the same source. Michael had a taxonomy, a personality typology for types of people and species, and he could look at like Russia was an old soul country and America was a young soul country and warrior types. There's a whole kind of taxonomy. And Bush would fit within the Michael Channel material, which is a very elegant personality typology, as elegant as any in psychology, by the way. And psychology doesn't give a hoot about it because it's so woo-woo, but really holds water. And so Bush, according to the Michael material and a lot of other sources I've read, would be pegged as kind of a big kid. Kind of a big kid, not very mature, and daddy's boy, and pretty spoiled, and also very much holding to simplistic things and stubbornly. Oh yeah. I mean, I think we wanted to transcend the world here in this conversation rather than get mundanely admired. I
had to ask you that question.
Okay.
I had to do it. I had to do it. Now, A Course in Miracles was channeled.
Yes.
And I think that the channel for that just sat down one day and this stuff came out, and then when it was all completed, she looked at it and didn't know if she believed it or not.
Right.
And didn't. Can you talk to us a bit about it?
She was pretty ticked off by it. She felt ambushed. But when I first heard about the Course in Miracles, I had come out in 1982 to visit Willis Harmon, who had a house on campus at Stanford, and we spent the whole evening talking. I was a professor at Rutgers University at the time, and by the end of the evening, he said, "You know, you seem to know more about channeling than anybody I've talked to. You ought to write a book about it." And so that's really where the book came from, out of that suggestion of his. But in the other room, he pointed at the dining room table, and there was a manuscript there, and it was the Course in Miracles that he had just gotten from Judah Scutch, and he was reading it. And the interesting thing about the Course in Miracles was that whoever it was, you know, the Christ, the transcendental intelligence, presence, God, who knows, or her own higher self, chose her, egoic, what was her name? I forget her name, but chose her, and she was unwilling. She said, "This is like a bad joke. I feel ambushed. I feel used. This is, I don't," because she was kind of an atheist type, didn't believe in this kind of stuff. She was ticked off by being the vehicle, which I think made it sound more likely that maybe it really was happening through her, because it wasn't like she grabbed her 15 minutes of fame or cooked it up.
How do how is, I think about these suicide bombers. What is the karmic repercussion of doing that on the other side?
Well, it doubles it. I mean, one of the reasons we wrote the book at this time, about a third of the book is about the suicide bombers, the Islamic fundamentalist extremists. And you know, do they get the 70 virgins, and does Allah welcome them with open arms for what they did? Well, no, that's a bill of goods they're being sold on this side. But the repercussions of killing others as well as yourself is even more severe, because if there was a plan, if it was a natural plan, a God-given plan for that soul unfoldment and growth on the part of other people, like, you know, with those Amish girls, you know, they all got snuffed, they all got precluded, they got sent back to the central processing thing and have to come back another time through another womb or through another, you know, opportunity cycle, according to the perennial philosophy, which I do subscribe to. But it does. How to presume to take someone else's life opportunities that way, as well as your own, doubles the sin, so to speak, doubles the no-no of it. And then the more that you have to kind of work off and learn from your mistakes and come back and sort of seek the forgiveness and do the good and help the people that you didn't think to help earlier, because you're learning what it's like to walk in both kinds of shoes. So you probably have to come back and get killed a few times.
Is there a danger in channeling?
There's a danger in channeling if you, in the DSM-4 or the DSM-3 when it was, which is the
DMS-4?
The Diagnostic Statistic Manual. It's what psychiatrists and psychologists use to diagnose people.
Right.
So if you're going to say, I'm going to decide that you're crazy, you're a channel, you're describing what you're doing, what you give yourself over to, lose altering consciousness, becoming dissociated, going into a trance, I'm going to, according to the DSM-4, that satisfies 4 of the 6 criteria for mental illness here, you know, this diagnosis. The head one a few years ago, they don't have it in there, it's called mediumistic psychosis. And mediumistic psychosis means you believe so much in the Ouija board, you so much are addicted to having to go back to a seance or go back to your medium or your channel to find out what cereal to buy tomorrow morning, you know, or who to vote for, or what you should believe in, that you've detached yourself from your own core. You no longer have an internal locus of control. Your locus of control, your locus of guidance, your locus of value is out there in some entity, let alone some guru or best friend or granny. And so that's a big problem. Anything that takes as the New Age says, that disempowers you, takes the power away from you. Channeling doesn't have to disempower you, to decenter you away from your own wisdom, your own center. I believe ultimately we all have the capacity to channel God, to have an umbilicus to source and get whatever we can get from that through the reducing valve from mind at large. That's the safest way to go. Because God, I believe, has the omniscience, the omnipotence, and the omnibenevolence, the compassion. And if you're guided by that and in alignment with that, getting what you can or have eked out for you, according to the ability to take it and handle it and be responsible with it, you'll be a lot better moving in this world and do less damage to people than if you're hooked to some entity that might not be much better off than you are as far as its self-centeredness or its using other people, physical or otherwise. So the only safe route in channeling is channel ultimate source, the source of all sources, and pray to be responsible and to be loving, and get whatever piece of the omniscience, the omnibenevolence, and the omniscience and the omnipotence that you can get, and be thankful for it, but to be of service to other. Be of service to other, not to self.
Which is the experience of the near-death experiencer.
Most of them come back changed that way. Right. They're like born again. They just love life. They're grateful. Their hearts bursting. They go around like little bodhisattvas, just full of bounty, generosity of spirit.
PMH Atwater was like that when she was here. Sure. I mean, we were sitting here for 3 hours under these bright lights, and I was getting a little bit frustrated, and she maintained her composure through the whole thing. She was cool. Excuse me. She was nurturing to us, encouraging for us, and I found that really impressive. I mean, she is the example of what she's talking about.
She transcended the game board by being shown the larger reality, and when she came back to the local subset, not the whole reality, but it's a little piece of the puzzle, and realized that this little constraint space we move and have our being within this lifetime, this consensus reality and all of that, was not the larger picture. She got a taste of the larger picture in her bones. You can't disabuse somebody who's had the experiential connection to the paranormal or the transcendental. They're left changed, and no amount of argument, or that's an illusion or a delusion, or you didn't really see it. Bull, man. And so she's filled with the spirit of it, and at that point, she just wants to let people know the good news. And the good news is it's not just this little box.
Dr. Klimo, we've got about 30 seconds. Is there one thing you'd like to tell the audience before we close? About channeling, suicide, near-death experience? Why we're here?
Don't commit suicide.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Help. It's a larger, populated, spiritual universe, not just this physical level of reality. It's a great, exciting, wondrous, essentially God-grounded reality, and it's just terribly exciting to be a creative spirit within it. And to always remember, we're all kind of offspring of the same creator, and we all have capacity to access that parental ground of being and to share with each other.
Right. Dr. Klimo, thank you so much for being here. Really, I think we've learned a lot. Maybe you can come back sometime. Maybe we can talk in nature, get away from these lights. I still haven't gotten used to it. Thanks for the crew. You know, you've done a wonderful job today, and I hope the audience who has listened to PMH Atwater has learned from this. And the message is, enjoy your life now, be open to people, give as much love as you can. And with that, I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.